Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Truth Defender podcast. It is December 16th, 2025. Removed one day from my birthday. So birthday is yesterday. I appreciate everybody reaching out with all of the birthday wishes and the emails that we got. I really appreciate that. We finally hit the big 4-0, so that was very depressing, but it's all right. But I appreciate everybody stopping in on this Tuesday. Tuesday, right? Yeah, we are Tuesday. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, as always, we're coming to you from the greatest country in the world, the great Republic of Texas, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas, to be more specific. If you guys aren't already a subscriber, please consider smashing that subscribe button for us, as well as that bell icon so you don't miss an episode in the future. Also, do us a favor and hit that like button as well. That'll really help us out with the algorithms. If you guys are on the go and want to check us out, as always, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio and Amazon Music at Truth Defender Podcast. If you guys love what we do here and you're feeling generous, please consider sharing the show with a friend, colleague, family member. The holidays are upon us, so all these topics that we get into are guaranteed to be, I guess, meltdowns for a lot of people, but pretty interesting. Thanksgiving is always interesting when it comes to these kind of topics. So I'm sure a lot of families were broken over Thanksgiving. And then now that we're getting close to Christmas, that would probably be the same thing as well. If you guys have any questions, as always, for myself or our guests, as well as guest or topic recommendations, you can shoot us an email at thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Find us on X, Kick, Instagram, Rumble, at Defender Podcast. So I mentioned last episode as well, we are now a proud affiliate of the Spiritual Awakening International group. Spiritual International is a nonprofit worldwide network of individuals and groups interested in collaborating to raise awareness, network, and share personal experiences relating to spirituality, transformative experiences, NDEs, near-death experiences as well. We have a great share group for a lot of people, as well as military veterans, which is why I got involved. So if you guys are struggling out there, you had some kind of experience that you're afraid to talk to your normal friends about, I guess, you can go ahead and hit us up. We actually have links in the show notes down below. We also have QR codes up here. You guys want to stop on in, you can go ahead and scan that QR. It'll take you directly to the website. Find a share group. They do a lot of them in person, but they also do most of them online, just like Zoom meeting, breakout rooms, and all that kind of stuff. You can share your experiences. So if you guys are feeling like you can't really share that kind of stuff with family members or friends for fear of being ridiculed, we're a big group here, and we won't give you a hard time about it. There's no making fun of people. Everybody that's in these groups have experienced some kind of ordeal when it comes to near death or any kind of ghosts or paranormal stuff, any kind of stuff. You guys can stop in, and we're just a big group here to help. So it makes it really good, and I guess kind of reaffirming that, there's actual doctors involved, MDs, medical doctors. You have pediatricians and everyday doctors that are in there, PhDs and all that kind of stuff. So it really validates the whole experience. So yeah, stop on in there as well. You guys can check that out. And we have links to all the shows and episodes that we got going on in our link tree down below in the show notes. So yeah, anything that comes up in the news related to Jeffrey Epstein, obviously that's been a whole topic that's probably never going to go away. For the obvious, just by the nature of what he was doing and kids involved and all that kind of stuff. But I think what's even a bigger issue is the fact that they've covered it up, and not even in a good way. It's blatantly obvious that that they've covered it up. And at first, it was just kind of one side that we figured might want to cover it up just because of the fact that they were involved in many things. But now it's like both sides of the aisle. They're promising to release documents and all kinds of things, and things just kind of get hidden still. Documents are redacted and they don't release all of them fully, and then you've got to fight to get more out, and both sides are trying to stop it, and it's wild, right? So it's obviously a house of cards. You pull one, the whole thing's going to fall. So there's a lot of trying to cover themselves and all that good stuff. But nobody knows the kind of intricacies better than our next guest, obviously. Leo Zagami has written over a dozen books, including the bestseller Pope Francis, The Last Pope. His collection, The Confessions of an Illuminati from Volume 4 all the way to 12 was a great series, and I have a feeling that this is going to be the next great series as well. So without further ado, friend of the show,
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here. So, you know, like I was mentioning before, Epstein is a huge topic, obviously, just about nature, just in general, obviously, everything that's going on with him. But there's a lot of intricacies when it comes to his story, people that are involved, organizations, not just in our government, but around the world. Obviously, Israel is involved. There's our government, CIA. It goes all the way to the very top, obviously, and obviously the way they hide a lot of the documents. Now, we mentioned before we started here that we have a deadline that's coming up soon, and there should be releasing more documents. I mean, we read a lot of stuff. Like obviously, all the files that are out there, you know, they release a lot of it. But I mean, how much do you think they actually release of anything that's legitimately has anything to do with it? You know, that could lead to somebody actually being arrested. And do you actually think that anybody will ever be arrested? I don't, but I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, like I wrote in my book, which we are talking about today, I don't think the entirety of the files will be ever released. They will be heavily redacted, to say the least. And there will be a lot of material that will be simply missing, and a lot of people that will be omitted in one way or another. There is a cover-up ongoing that goes beyond the levels of power, which is political power. It goes into the elite of the elite that rules the military-industrial complex, that controls big pharma, that controls the intelligence agencies that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. There is too many powerful people. Of course, there will be an attempt that we are already seeing. It's ongoing. The matter is being highly politicized on both sides. It's been a disappointment, I think, what we have seen from the Republicans. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, Trump is trying to somehow get the whole thing out in the proper way. Maybe he's hiding some kind of operation. There is a lot of people who are simply trying to protect, of course, their idea of Trump, which in the second presidency has become obvious is not the same Donald J. Trump we saw before. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, because, of course, we are both patriots. We have both voted for him. We are people who believe in making America great. But America great means also America first. And when you are putting first other countries, you are aiming for new wars, which shouldn't really be your priority when you have promised the golden age here in America, which is not really happening, at least not for the majority of people. I'm sure that the elite is thriving in their benefits, making a lot of money on the stock market and so on. But the common folk simply goes to the supermarket and comes out depressed, or he gets to the end of the month and sees his bills that have duplicated, and he kind of like really tries to put together, like we say in Italy, the lunch with the dinner with difficulty in this time of still great crisis. I mean, it's the economy that talks for itself, and I think the majority of Americans are not happy. Now, there will be, of course, those people who still will defend until the end Trump, but I think that will finish with the midterm elections. If you have a change in Trump before then, but I mean, it's difficult to say at this point if we have even a chance of changing things around even for the benefit of the Republican Party that is going to go down the drain for sure in these midterm elections.
Yeah. It's always a shame whenever they complain about not having control of all forms of the government, the House and the presidency and all that kind of stuff. And they finally do, and then they don't do anything with it. So it's like, I don't want to hear it, you know.
I mean,
You guys never do.
Absolutely, you're right. I mean, when you have the control of all branches of the government, your life should be easy. The possibility of carrying on the promises you made during the campaign should be easy. Instead, there were a lot of promises, but they were never kept. Now, Susie Willis, we have now this whole thing about Willis being interviewed by Vanity Fair. Susie Willis, of course, in the Oval Office, she's the House Chief of Staff, and the fact that she herself is critical, and she's currently still there and critical of the people who are there, I mean, it talks really a lot about the core team that Trump himself surrounded has surrounded himself with. So let's see what's going to happen. But I mean, to say that we have a plus economy when there is no pluses here, there is a lot of minuses. And I think that instead of eluding ourselves, we should be very honest. And I started writing this book, tell you the truth, when I started to see that this topic was not really being fully exposed the way that this current administration initially promised us. I mean, people like Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, and so on. I mean, there is promises that have been made. There is actually entire, these people were doing podcasts, radio shows, and so on, and talking for hours about how they will, you know, from day one, get the whole FBI upside down, and they will finally reveal the truth about things. And now we have instead a administration which is clearly obstructing all that. And when I say this, I even see people in the comments of my videos that say, oh, well, you don't know the real plan. The real plan of what?
It's always 4D chess, right? It's the whole thing that I always hear all the time. He's playing 4D chess and there's a plan going. There's no plan. Like, we're just all on the same boat here. Like, they promised a lot of things.
Like it reminds me of that QAnon mentality that carried on after the November 2020 elections, which eventually drew a bunch of fools to storm the Capitol Hill and to ruin their lives in many cases. And I had friends who unfortunately were there, and people who still to this day live to regret what they did, or even being around the Capitol Hill was already a matter of, investigation for the FBI. So people were investigated simply for being in Washington, D.C., and that maybe the phone cell was around the area. So, I mean, people certainly had visits from the FBI, and of course it was an FBI and a DOJ that the past president Biden politicized. But then we should have not followed in that direction. We should have reclaimed that democracy, that way of the republic, if you want to call it democracy, that characterizes America. You have a new president, and then you, of course, respect the past president, even if it's from a different party. You don't go after him. The problem was that they went after Trump in a very strong way, and now he wants revenge. But that revenge doesn't give you points in your legacy. Doesn't make your name pass in front of others in history as a better human being and a better president, I think. So, having said that, The Rise and Fall of Frankie's Monster, my book, touches, of course, on certain elements, but it's not a political book. It's a book about a sect, a religion, Judaism, that was infiltrated. There is elements that connect. When you know that Washington is in the hands of AIPAC or the people from the Israel lobby influence so much what goes on in American politics, but at the same time, there's been a rise of anti-Semitism, of course, that we just saw in the last few days. What has happened is despicable. This rise of anti-Semitism is something we shouldn't tolerate in any way, shape, or form. But unfortunately, it's like I explain in my book, a state, a Sabbatean Frank state of Israel that does everything to actually push this anti-Semitism on their own people, on the Jewish people. The biggest enemy of the Jewish people in this case are the Sabbatean Frankists, who are Jewish people themselves. So they prefer not to ever discuss this topic. They prefer to leave it, when Jacob Frank, who of course picked up from Shabbatai Zevi, that's why the Sabbatean then became Sabbatean Frankist, there was that whole thing regarding the blood libels. I mean, we know that is accusation that was pretty heavy on the Jews and the persecutions of the Jews, especially in Europe. This blood libel, this ritual murder, this anti-Semitic trope that falsely accuse Jews of murdering Christians in order to use their blood in religious human sacrifices of sorts. But the problem is that Jacob Frank actually, what he did, he supported that idea. So that already shows you that Jacob Frank was supporting the very people who wanted to actually demonize the Jews. Because in the idea of this sect, anything that basically goes, the Jews who have not accepted Shabbatai Zevi and then Jacob Frank as their messiahs are Jews that are expendable, just like the ones in the Holocaust, another, of course, very controversial topic, which I also talk about in my book. But my book specifies, first of all, that it's a way actually of fighting anti-Semitism, to be clear about certain matters. It's not about indulging in more anti-Semitism. Right. The moment in which we understand that a sect and a group of people have done this within a religion, which is Judaism, you are not condemning all the Jews. You are simply condemning a sect. You are condemning a movement. Before that, Sabbateans were a movement that almost half of the Jews in Europe accepted as their own, because they believed that Shabbatai was their Messiah until he converted to Islam. But for the common folk who is following us now and maybe wants to have in a nutshell the content of this book of mine, or at least the main points that are discussed, it's Jeffrey Epstein, the product of a culture, and of course of a infiltration within Judaism, that then manifested also in the creation of the Jewish state, with the creation of labor Zionism as well as revisionist Zionism, so creating the two opposites that still today fight each other in the political arena in Israel. These are inconvenient topics that are very rarely discussed even by Jews. The fact that, you see, we have now Judaism here in the United States in a variety of shape and form, but 80% of it is mostly Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism accept anything from the transsexual rabbi to the woman rabbi to any other blasphemous, let's say, transformation of what instead should be the Mosaic laws and a respect for the Sinaic and the Mosaic laws. So there is, I think, here an interest, even from the academic world. When I went and researched all the material for this book, which, as you can see yourself, I mean, I know that you have read this book, so I know that you have at least gone through it and know that this is a book that doesn't base itself on speculations. It's based on hard facts, evidence, academic knowledge, as well as testimonies that are credible and reliable from rabbis, from rabbinical schools, Jewish archives. It's not about speculation. If we want to speculate, go somewhere else. This book is about the reality of what Jeffrey Epstein was built of. And together with him, Ghislaine Maxwell, who had a key role, and that's why in the end she's still alive and Jeffrey Epstein is not. And at the same time, we have Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the only other person to be investigated, who was the guy who brought 1,000 girls and a lot of minors as young as 12 to Little St. James. And he was also found suicided, because that's what it is. You know, he suicided himself. It's a joke. In the case of Jeffrey Epstein, the suicide is really impossible because, I mean, to actually study the way he's supposed to have done it, it's to realize that it's impossible. I mean, and the same with Jean-Luc Brunel. These people were killed. These people were whacked, as you say, no? And they were no longer, of course, deemed useful and suitable for an elite that often likes to have, to save their appearances. And when those appearances are jeopardized, they will do anything to, save their appearances. And when that elite is made of people like the former Prince Andrew, or rather Bill Gates, or other people like Peter Thiel, for example. Peter Thiel is behind J.D. Vance, and in fact, I'm very worried about this candidacy for the next presidency because it's going nowhere. It's a joke. And the problem is that a lot of people are thinking that. And the fact that now we saw just in the last, of course, in the last few hours with this revelation made by Vanity Fair about Susie Willis, what she thinks of J.D. Vance. I mean, you're talking here about the chief of staff of the White House that is describing the whole portfolio of the whole cabinet as a joke, basically.
Yeah. I don't know. It's, like you touched on earlier, obviously, we're promised a lot of things, and we discussed it earlier. Dan Bongino has been a huge letdown. Kash Patel, like you mentioned, they were going on podcasts right before the election, all over Joe Rogan's podcast. Dan Bongino has his own show, and just like the 180 that they both. I was expecting a little bit more out of Dan Bongino. Like I didn't expect him to be like that. Kash Patel, I always kind of thought maybe he wasn't always up front, but Dan Bongino was the one that I was very surprised with. And like every time you see him talk, or like he gives interviews, he always seems like like he's being held hostage or something. Like he doesn't want to be there and say anything.
But that's what that's what they have become, these people. They might have been brilliant to start with, or at least they were genuine in supporting the second Trump presidency, and that's why they also been involved in it. But the fact that that now you have a lot of questions about the way they have delivered, starting from the Epstein files and the whole debacle there. I think that was really the beginning of me saying something is really wrong here, because Pam Bondi, the way she initially said, I have it on my table, here they are, we are about to reveal it. They called a bunch of influencers and they gave them some kind of presentation.
Yeah,
something that in the end was publicly available, most of it, but just to appear like they were about to reveal I don't know what on Jeffrey Epstein, and then go back, retract, and say there's nothing to see here, let's move on. And then and that was when I was actually really in the heart of my book, and I was writing, and then in fact, that's when I wrote the introduction. I was like, I started it, as you know, with the president says, "Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?" Yes, we are still talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and we still probably going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein for a long time, like you implied yourself at the beginning when you started to mention the whole thing. Now, I am really worried about the future of America, because all this is just a preamble to what I've been discussing for many years: cyber Satan, robotics, the AI takeover. And Jeffrey Epstein was actually part of that movement of technocrats very close to him. He himself was involved with the software of Hanson Robotics behind Sophia the Robot. He was involved with the Santa Fe Institute. He was involved with the people who were doing all kind of experiments, both in the Zorro Ranch as well as in other places where he was active, not only as the head of this human trafficking / blackmail operation, which, by the way, he was not really the head. He was put there. He had been put there from the very beginning. And that's what my book really goes deep into. Goes deep into the family background of Epstein, of Ghislaine Maxwell, of the people of the Jewish study group of Les Wexner, Donald Barr, who gave him his first job at the Dalton School. But then, as you see, my book goes much deeper, because by bringing you back 200 or 300 years, then we start seeing that these people, not only they infiltrated Judaism, but then they infiltrated Islam, then they infiltrated the Catholic world, then they infiltrated the Anglican world. Not happy about it, they created their own Masonic code. Basically, they were instrumental in the creation of the Asiatic Brethren, because their content of their teachings became their own. And then at that point, they became influential within the Freemasons, the Illuminati. They brought the teachings of Shabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank to the Freemasons and introduced them to that deviant form of sexual magic, inverted Kabbalah, Lurianic Kabbalah, twisted by their interpretation, which is pretty demonic. So then you have also a group which was inspiration in the creation of the very banking cartel that rules the world, and the most powerful and influential families, even some of those ones who went to Jekyll Island and created the Federal Reserve. So it all becomes part of the power establishment that then is not Trump. Trump is just, in my book, as you know, I mentioned it maybe 2 times. It's just a very en passé kind of thing. It's very, literally. It's nothing Trump in this book. Even if, of course, he's mentioned because of his connection with Epstein, is mentioned, but no criminal doing has ever been proven. And he's not really about protecting himself in this whole debacle of the files. It's about protecting people who are very powerful, who, of course, are behind him, who are behind the White House, who are behind the military industrial complex, who are behind the big pharma, who are behind the system that we rely on. And that is the big problem here. It's not so much, people focus like, I saw the last few days there was the publication of some photos, and of course, even the Democrats, they publish photos that maybe in the end don't mean anything out of context. And then, of course, they facilitate people who say, well, I'm going to vote Trump once again if I see they're doing this against him, because those were simply beauty pageants, and that was. But it's not about that. It's not about Trump. Trump was, of course, somebody who knew what was going on. That he knew. Though he might have not liked them on the young side, as he himself admitted Epstein liked them on the young side. So the problem then is that we need, as Americans, to understand that here there is actually behind the scenes people who are involved with all the presidents all the way back to the 1940s, to the very foundation of Israel. People who have been involved from the very start in this thing which we call New World Order, that of course came out of the Second World War and of the necessity of bringing stability. And who was the guy who brought this world order? He made a book, I think. I don't know if I have it here. I don't know if I have it here, but yes, maybe if I find it. Well, it's Henry Kissinger.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Henry Kissinger, yeah, I think I have his book, World Order, somewhere. I don't know where, but it's a very nice book. If you go and read it, I have one of the first editions of it, if I find it somewhere, I don't know where. But in any case, he was excommunicated by a rabbinical council of the late Rabbi Marvin Antelman, who was one of the few rabbis who had the courage to denounce the Sabbatean Frankists in this era. Because the problem, like I explained in my book, is that after the end, let's say still until the beginning of the 20th century, we have traces of the Sabbatean Frankists. Even here in America, amongst those immigrants from Eastern Europe, those Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, then it seems like it fades out, like there is no testimony of a meeting, of a document, of something. The last document, I think Gershon Scholem points out on a document from the late 1800s here in America, but then nothing really. It's, there is, of course, other testimonies later on that are important. But in this book, for example, the influence of the Sabbatean Frankists brings us all the way to the first Jewish member of the Supreme Court of the United States, whose wife was this woman here, who was herself somebody who promoted, her name was Alice Godmark Brandels, vocal supporter of the Sabbatean Frankists. She openly said it, that she was a supporter of their ideas. And she was considered a champion of progressive causes that were promoted by her husband, who was Louis Brandels, leading Zionist and the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. So, the level of influence within the American culture is enormous. And the fact that today in universities, in Jewish universities in Israel, we have very rarely people who discuss the Sabbatean Frankist subject. There was Gershon Scholem, who was one of the most eminent experts also of Kabbalah. And then we have Macieko, who wrote The Mixed Multitude, Jacob Frank and the Frankist Movement, which is a very good book. But the problem with these academics, that they are often leftists, they are often non-religious, secularized Jews, to say the least, often tendencies, the like liberal tendencies that they tend to look up to, and then at that point they say that is because the Sabbatean Frankist influence in a positive way. That's why we have feminism. That's why we have Reform Judaism. That's why we have the more leftist tendencies that maybe both in the political arena as well as the religious arena. And they, at times, of course, think that is actually a good thing. So when we see a guy like Zelensky, and Zelensky is the epitome of the typical Sabbatean Frankist. His background, he's not even a secularized Jew. He's an atheist at heart. He's a guy who will do anything for money, who doesn't have, he's not a genuine follower of the Jewish faith. But at the same time, Zelensky can always rely on that network that is influential, of course.
Right. So there's a couple of things. Well, just like an off comment, I guess. Zelensky was obviously put in place there because, isn't Ukraine kind of, I always
First
saw
of all, Jacob Frank,
like on Vice. Well, I'm sorry. I'm just saying like I would always see before like on Vice, right? When it was still kind of popular. The Ukraine is like full of Nazis, right? Like there's a lot of Nazi sympathizers there, a lot of Nazis, a lot of people there. And then Zelensky is supposed to be a Jewish guy.
But yes, but Adolf Hitler was the same.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So
okay, the thing is that Volodymyr Zelensky not only tolerates but promotes Nazism, because that's what he's promoting in his country. And at the same time, nobody ever points it out because, he's the number one enemy of Russia, and we have to be with him all the way. We have to fight Russia. Russia is all the... It's like, quite paradoxical. But the thing is, yes, he is Jewish, but he's Jewish as much as Adolf Hitler was Jewish. And Adolf Hitler, like I explained in my book, was a product of a Sabbatean Frankist ritual. And this was Rabbi Antelman, the same guy who excommunicated Henry Kissinger in the second half of the 70s, because Henry Kissinger was a guy who arrives in Israel and says, "Give me a nice sandwich with pork." It's about doing things like that identifies the modern Sabbatean Frankist more than a formula belonging to this group. But there is also, of course, behind the scenes, and this I explain in my book, families that transmit the Sabbatean Frankist legacy within the Jewish tradition, but they do it in secret. Right. And they are the ones who maybe belong to Orthodox Judaism today, or they had converted to Catholicism, but they still practice in secret this heresy, or like the Dome in Turkey, who have integrated with the Islamic world, and now are very difficult to trace, because for those who have just tuned in, the first Messiah that declared himself to the Jewish world was Shabbatai Zevi, and he came from the Ottoman Empire, from Izmir. The father, though, Mortegai Zevi, like I explain in my book, was working for the English Puritans. And the English Puritans, their number one obsession was to bring the Jews back to England and then back to Israel. And then build up the lie of British Israelism, which is like making the Anglo-Saxon world believe they are the lost tribes of Israel. So that is quite interesting. Now, Zelensky had an historic meeting back in 2019. People might not know that. But back in 2019, he had an historic meeting with a few rabbis. At the time, he was still really considered a comedian who was about then to turn into the political arena. I can show you, if you want, on the screen. You can share it from see, first Jewish president of Ukraine holds historic meeting with the rabbis. Comedian turned politician. Look at the date, May 7, 2019. Now,
didn't Speaker Johnson just do the same thing as well the other day?
What's that?
Didn't Speaker Johnson just do the same thing as well the other day?
Well, of course, but the interesting thing, he does it regularly, not to engage with the, of course. But here, look at who were the representatives. Included Chabad Lubavitch emissaries. Now, we all know that Chabad Lubavitch is Orthodox Judaism of a certain kind, because it has been infiltrated. They claim they are conservative. They claim they are traditional. But then, if you really know the people of Chabad Lubavitch, you know that there is a lot of liberal, a lot of people who actually practice New Age on the side, shamanism, witchcraft, all kinds of things. But, you know, they like to present themselves as being all. And you can see here the various rabbis. Now, Rabbi Shumel Kamenetsky of Dnipro. Dnipro is the place where Madame Blavatsky was born. Madame Blavatsky, whose mentor, like I explained in my book, was Max Theon, who was himself a Sabbatean from a Orthodox Jewish background, Hasidic Jews, because that's what the Chabad Lubavitch they claim to be. Here, all these, you see, and then you have Rabbi Avram Wolf of Odessa. Odessa is a very important place because it's the epicenter in Ukraine of Freemasonry. So all this went on while the world was not really talking about Judaism. And sorry, was not talking about Zelensky and Judaism, but this is being a very important turning point for his career, let's say. And today, from time to time, he gets to meet with, you know, the interesting thing is that they met in 2019, but then when the war started, they claimed another first meeting. Check this out. Second. In a first, Volodymyr Zelensky met with Chabad rabbis ahead of Rosh Hashanah. He already met them in 2019, but of course, now the war had started. It was a different kind of setup at that point. But once again, the Chabad rabbis, and who is working with Chabad? It's Jared Kushner, the husband of Ivanka, who actually lives nearby a synagogue of the Chabad community. Now, I'm not saying that every Chabad member is wrong in his doing. Somebody now wrote, Zagami is covering up for Obama. No, we're not coming up for everybody. Actually, one thing I will make very clear, there is not one president in the last few decades who has not been involved with these people. and who is not actually being blackmailed also for sexual perversion. Barack Hussein Obama was the guy who, when he was a senator in Chicago, he had a guy, Sinclair, coming in his car making oral sex while they were doing lines of cocaine and smoking crack. Now, come on, guys. I mean, and then we have, on top of that, also what happened with Bill Clinton, Epstein, Levinsky, blah, blah, blah. Then we have George W. Bush, who was no saint. Right. So it's not like,
I mean,
tell me, maybe the only guy who ethically and morally, but he was very boring and he was very bad president, was Jimmy Carter. But I mean, or Nixon. I mean, they were not really the best presidents. And having said that, if you go into the into what is really, because you see, Jeffrey Epstein was a creation of people who were very influential. People like I said, Donald Barr, but then Les Wexner, and Les Wexner then created what is known as the mega group, the study group, Jewish study group, in which there were some very influential people. There were people like Marvin Lander, Lester Crown, Michael Steinhardt. And these are people who have been really influential in a number of sectors, from the oil companies to the big pharma to the military industrial complex and so on. Yeah. One of the people who is not discussed so much, who was apparently very close to Epstein, is Charles Schutterman, who died in the year 2000. He was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, out of all places. And he was a large donor to Jewish causes in the United States and Israel. And he was born in the Soviet Union, from an Orthodox Russian Jewish family. But when you say Russian Orthodox Jewish family, you have to understand that there is always a link with the Sabbatai and Franks, because Shabbatai Zevi pushed them to convert to Islam. Then Jacob Frank pushed them to convert to Catholicism. But those who didn't want to convert to Catholicism stay hidden within what was the growing Orthodox faction, Orthodox Jewish faction, which in a way also did good things to react to the Sabbatai and Frankists at one point. I mean, there were also rabbis, like I explain in my book, who fought against Sabbatai and Frankism. It's not honest to say that there wasn't a rabbinical course or rabbis who fought against this heresy. But did they manage to stop it? No. Did they manage? Because then the way they spread, both in the religious side as well as in the political arena, in the ideological arena, they promoted what is what is known as the Jewish Enlightenment. And the Jewish Enlightenment became a way for the Jews to secularize and distance themselves from their faith, a bit like we did in the Western world. Today, we are very distant. You know, most countries in the Western world might claim themselves a Christian heritage of sorts, or Judeo-Christian heritage of sorts, but most people are not really practicing and not even believing at times. Yeah. Because they see religion as something that is too strict, no?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so like in the book, obviously, I think the whole Frankenstein metaphor was a great metaphor, obviously, because, you know, Jeffrey Epstein obviously didn't work alone. There's a lot of people behind him, a lot of governments, a lot of very important people throughout the world in religion, military, people that are very high up in the government, even people that are not in the government that still control things behind the scenes. Was he, I mean, obviously, when there's people like Jeffrey Epstein in the world, I mean, they're not built up for the long game, I guess. Like, was it inevitable that he would get arrested one day or that he'd be killed and somebody else would take his place. I mean, how did they kind of set up these guys in the first place? And then,
Well,
when they get caught, they can just cut ties.
I always will point out that Roy Cohn, who is also known as Trump's mentor, was the factor whereby then Jeffrey Epstein took over on what Roy Cohn was already doing. I mean, Roy Cohn was a guy who was using this kind of blackmail operations based on sex with minors or sex with men or sex with whatever, and then he will of course use them to control people. At the same time, we have to also understand that this sexual deviance has also an occult side, that it's not only for these people a matter. Because, I mean, come on, if people so rich wanted to have sex, they could simply lift the phone and get it wherever they want. They didn't have to go to Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't simply a VIP pimp of sorts. He was something else. He was providing a safe surrounding for these setups. And he was also believing in what the Sabbatean Frankists believe, redemption through sin. So bringing this sin to manifest more and more until you become basically, just like the people in Eyes Wide Shut, the scene where you have all these people being involved in this act that has a ritual basis, that has an occult value, but then at the same time can be used also to blackmail people. And it's forbidden for anybody to talk about these things outside their perimeter. So Jeffrey Epstein knew very well from the very beginning that he was playing with fire. He was not, somebody. He was well acquainted, let's say, with playing with fire, and it was actually the people who gave him the opportunity, like Les Wexner, literally for $1 gave him a building which is worth $70 or $80 million, maybe more. How is that possible? People don't ask.
He definitely had something on him. I mean, obviously, that's very obvious.
It's not only that. No, that is wrong. And I explain it in my book in a way. It's about Wexner simply telling, you have my power. I give, at one point we know he had this power of attorney. No, by simply Wexner saying, this is the building, rigged with all the cameras. You now work for us. We are the ones who are constructing Jeffrey Epstein that becomes, of course, then a guy who can manifest all kinds of things, purchase private islands rather than Zorro Ranch or any other thing, and gets received in a private audience by the Pope. Is not simply Jeffrey Epstein, it's the people behind Jeffrey Epstein. And that's why the files will always be partial. And that's why Trump is stopping. Somebody told me, but don't you know that if these things are released in their fullest, there will be a crisis. The whole of Washington will be, coming to that. I know that. I wrote that in my book. I wrote it. So people say, don't you know? I know. I wrote it in my book. That's why I know that it was important to write a book like this. A book that will give a different take from what the journalists or other people, that have made documentaries, that have written books on, maybe the espionage side of thing rather than the business side of thing. The fact that Jeffrey Epstein was conducting all kind of illicit activities, of course. But at the same time, they are still covering up for him when they say that the Saudi Arabia passport was fake, because it wasn't fake. It was a real Saudi Arabia passport. And the guy who gave him the possibility of that residency in Austria, out of all places, Where was Jeffrey Epstein resident in his second passport? The headquarters of the Sabbatean Frankists in Europe, Vienna and Austria. That is the place where the Sabbatean Frankists manifested. So it's easy for them to say, okay, Jeffrey Epstein is simply a guy who was doing this and that, and maybe he managed to get Les Wexner or other billionaires to be, to give him things because he blackmailed them. These people are so powerful. They are untouchable still now. If they wanted to, to get rid of Jeffrey Epstein, they could have done it in any moment. They ultimately did it when it was really literally impossible for them to cover him up more.
Yeah, no, it's like I guess that's another angle that is pretty obvious now that you say that. We always think that Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing very important people, but it never occurred to me that these very important people were just allowing him to exist and to work for them. We always think it's the other way around, but it's the people at the top. They were just letting him do what he was doing. They gave him the money, all the places.
And then, of course, they took advantage of the young girls and this and that because it was all part, And then, of course, you have a figure like Ghislaine Maxwell who had this fixation with this creation of also a choreography of young girls that were always available, the famous massages and all the rest. But the reality of it is that in that island, there was much more that went on, and that is not yet even discussed. And yes, there might be some pics that feature sexual acts that might see the light soon. But of course, we are not going to see Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, raping Virginia Giuffre, or we're going to see Bill Clinton raping some other minor, because simply that is a state, security of the state is at stake for that kind of thing. And they know that.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part, is that they're going to hide all of that, especially when it's people that obviously the president's here in the United States, the matters of national security, because obviously they open those files up, and there's other people that are associated, and they're just like, oh, we can't release that because of national security or whatever else. So just by association, they don't have to release them, or they're not going to because it's against the law. So that's very unfortunate.
No, but ultimately they're gonna just partially release some things, always hoping that people have a short memory and then they eventually can move on. That is their interest. There is too many things at stake to fully expose what Jeffrey Epstein was about. And that's also because, like my book explains, Ghislaine Maxwell had a central role in what was literally almost a religious role, let's say, the Shekinah, the divine feminine aspect of God that she was representing in this perverse context. Now people might say, but how is it possible? Well, Jacob Frank had his own daughter to get naked and perform certain acts. And if you go and study the Sabbatean Frankist books, I mean, they condone all kinds of stuff. I mean, from wife swapping to incest to sleeping with minors is the least thing there. I mean, it's just disgusting. Even the contents of the books that they followed are very rarely discussed. I talk about the Vavo Ayom Elahin in my book. I talk about the Menuta de Kula, which is another important book by Nehemiah Ayun, who was this Sabbatean Bosnian Kabbalist. But nobody really talks about these things. And I tell you, it's the rabbis themselves, so I want to keep it out of the picture because it stains their image.
Right.
We know that, for example, in the past, we had popes who slept with their own daughters, or we had popes like the Borgias who did all kinds of depravity. It came out in the end. But there is a lot more that hasn't come out. And the popes are just like these rabbis who performed all kinds of depraved stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't have much hopes for the deadline for them to release.
No, I mean, it's going to be a partial charade that is going to be. But let's remember that at the same time, we are witnessing in the last few days what has happened in Australia. And we are in front of an anti-Semitic act that was perpetrated on people who were celebrating Hanukkah, which is basically a celebration that they were doing there with children, with the innocent people. But then who were the organizer of that event? It was the Chabad organization. We should have some questions about why this organization keeps re-emerging over and over again.
It's not. It's definitely not by coincidence. I don't feel, but it's never.
It's weird that we have, at the same time, one important element that we notice in my book is the connection of Jesuit, Sabbatean, Frankist go hand in hand in this new world order. So, I terminated my Confessions of an Illuminati series with volume 12, which is the book on the Jesuits. And then, of course, I'm starting now with this new book, a new series of books that are going to focus on topics which I might have touched briefly during the Confessions, but they deserve a much more in-depth look. So I think that you're going to be, happy about my upcoming publications, because they will simply expand on what. But if you want to already have a full encyclopedia of what the New World Order and the Illuminati, as we commonly refer to them, or Freemason, volume 1 to 12 is definitely, all these books are important. And I think that they are unique in the way that they expose things that other authors have maybe touched either academically, so making them very boring, or maybe speculating a bit too much because they didn't really have the direct experience I had myself, being part of certain organizations and having a direct experience. Like even in this book, I rely on, I give some testimony. It's not, of course, Confessions of an Illuminati, so it doesn't have that biographical element. But there is, for example, testimony of my encounter with the Sabbatean Frankists in Russia and what they explained to me about them, which was rather interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big book, a lot of information. And obviously, you're going to turn that into a series, so I'm looking forward to that as well. In the future, it's a lot of reading, a lot of information, a lot of dots to.
Well, I hope that people still read. Now, of course, we are at the end of today's show. I will have to leave you soon so I can go back to my writing. But I must say, people are reading less and less. And that is not because I want to, lament that we are maybe in the wrong business in this day and age. But it's the problem that most people simply scroll on their phone or read 1 or 2 pages on the internet, and they think they know it all, when in reality you really need to have a much more in-depth investigation and analysis on certain subjects. That's why I like the fact that you, Paul, have actually taken the time to go through this book before this interview.
Yeah, I enjoy the information. There's always something going on in my head, and if I can connect the dots somewhere, I'm always looking forward to that kind of information. I think, obviously, like you mentioned, people are reading less and less. I mean, in the future, you should put some kind of series together where you kind of explain the information. I think that probably go over a little better. Obviously, that's a lot more work, but I think that would really be interesting to a lot of people instead of having to read and stuff, which, like you said,
but the people need to go back into
Yeah.
reading, because you see, I can, I did a series, for example, on my channel, which was Illuminati Occult, going into all the various, aspects of the Illuminati. I made a 50 episode series, which defined really a lot of their practices, their beliefs, and everything. But in the end, when you open a book, you start to understand that because you can go really deep on certain subjects, and 1 or 2 hours on a podcast, on a show, doesn't really it doesn't do the right justice to certain topics. You need to really study for hours certain topics to really understand them fully.
Yeah, it's definitely a lost art.
And like this gentleman is saying here, important to own physical copies, because we really don't know the future. How is it going to develop with the artificial intelligence, the control? I mean, when you see what Palantir is doing, when you see that it's all about control of every aspect of your life, you want to rely on sources that still keep you in the privacy of your own brain. When you open up, even, I know that I sell Kindles also, but when you open a Kindle, you're not the only one who is opening it, and the AI is directly connected to it. So I always suggest to get the hard copy, because then you want to switch and go off the grid one day. Maybe a book is the only way. We have a problem here. The problem is coming up very soon. The development of cyber Satan within the next 3 years will transform mankind, and by 2030 we're going to really start to see a radical transformation. So then at that point, of course, we're going to have part of the new generations who probably will never pick up a book ever, because they will be simply connected, at the scroll of their eye here, or their glasses, or whatever they have. Everything is going to be more and more with a transhumanist element, and so it's going to be like access to information will be immediate, but that's not going to be really like your own experience. That's going to be simply relying on something that is simply made for you, and you're parroting, like a parrot.
Yeah, well, I'm well suited and positioned to understand the cyber world very well. And since I work in that space, so I'm very familiar with how fast things change and what's actually coming up here in the near future. So, but obviously I got my copy of the book, and I highly encourage everybody to get theirs as well. We'll have links to the books and websites and everything in the show notes down below, so everybody can go ahead and check that out. But
thank you so much for having me on. And of course, we will see each other probably next year, if God wants, with something new and also challenging as usual.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to it. I look forward to your books often. So I purchased a few of them in the past. I have this one already, and I'll be looking forward to the next one, obviously. So we'll obviously speak next year, hopefully, God willing. So have a great
Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year to your viewers, and to everybody who is following us today, also on my channel and on my Facebook, because I also relayed your show also on my platforms. And I think that Christmas should be a time for us to come together, regardless of our political divisions or ideological divisions. And the most important thing is the family and the friendship that we have. And I cherish also my friendship with you, Paul, who has been a very good friend for a long time now, with your shows and your support for my work. So God bless you all.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. God bless you. Merry Christmas, and we'll be talking soon.
Take care.
Thank you, sir. All right, y'all. Well, that was Mr. Zagami there with his latest book. Like I mentioned, we'll have links to his book on Amazon is where I got mine. So highly encourage it. It's a thick book, a lot of information, a lot of connecting the dots, like all of his books. So I highly recommend that. Links to that in the show notes as well. Links in the social media, Linktree, and all that good stuff. But yeah, appreciate everybody. I hope everybody's geared up for Christmas. It's coming up real quick, and I have 0 presents yet. So I gotta be getting on that before that happens. So I hope everybody has a great one. Have a great rest of the week. I'm not sure exactly when we'll be back up. We do have talks with people coming on. So whenever I get them on, whenever they commit, we'll be coming to you guys with that. But yeah, guys, appreciate it. As always, if you guys aren't already subscribers, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well as that bell icon. You miss a show in the future. Hit that like button as well. That'll really help us out. Consider sharing the show with a friend, colleague, family member, especially for Christmas. We have a good little backlog and little catalog here online. A lot of our shows that I would consider good ones were deleted off YouTube. But we have most of them up on Rumble. So Rumble came like after a lot of those shows got deleted, but we had a lot of great stuff with like 9/11 and just very sensitive stuff that we had great guests on. Those should be up on Rumble. So if you want to check those out, you can there. As always, questions for myself or a guest or topic recommendations, shoot us an email at thetruthDefender1776@gmail.com. Xkick, Instagram, Rumble, all that stuff's up. Linktree as well for all the links to our social media. So appreciate everybody. And as always, this right here, little QR code right there. Like I mentioned before, we are now affiliated with the Spiritual Awakening International Group. A lot of great information there for people that have experienced things in the past, whether it's near-death experiences or interactions or encounters with what you think might be, I guess, abductions or any kind of crazy paranormal stuff that you think you might have experienced. You can stop in with these people here. No judgment. Everybody that's a part of the group has experienced something in the past. So they're very familiar with what's going on. It makes it a little more credible when there's actual doctors behind it, psychiatrists, PhDs, and all that stuff. So stop in, take a look at that. It's a lot of good information. So appreciate everybody. I hope everybody has a great Christmas. Stay safe out there. Stay blessed. And as always, God, family, Texas. Have a good one.